Hey everybody, this is Rex Bear with Leak Project. I hope you're having a nice day wherever you are. It is August 14th, 2016. Radiation levels are low at 0.11 microsieverts per hour. Now, we had an incredible interview that I am presenting to you today with Thornhill from the Thunderbolts project. He's got some amazing work on the electric universe, and his hypothesis is absolutely mind-blowing. I would strongly recommend listening to this interview if you have an interest in the electric universe. I have never talked to anybody with so much knowledge on the subject. Now, much of the solar system we live in today, he claims, was actually formed from a binary star, aka brown dwarf. Now, is that brown dwarf star Saturn? We talk about electric winds on electric worlds in an electric universe. We discuss the red and blue Kachina, the Hopi prophecies, and what the red Kachina as well as blue Kachina could actually be. We also get into the translations of Nibiru, and could it actually be a reflection of what happened in the past? We talk about how old the solar system is. We get into space travel and how possible that is in an electric universe. We discuss shooting stars, black holes, interplanetary discharges. We talk about the missing craters on the moon Ceres. We discuss the different stars in the electric universe and what they actually are. This is quite mind-bending as well. Then we discuss gravity. How does time travel fit into the theory? Quantum physics versus the electronic universe or the electric universe. Life after physical death. Science, global warming. How is the Grand Canyon created? Newton's electric clockwork solar system. How the present view of the sky is not the key to the past. We discuss cosmic symbols of ancient sky anomalies, the Greek pantheon and mythos, as well as the Sumerian translations. We talk about gravity being faster than the speed of light by 20 billion times, as well as what is time. This is discussed on this podcast as well as more. Make sure to subscribe to leakproject.com as well as youtube.com/clandestine time lord. You'll get access to a bounty of gourmet clandestine knowledge. Absolute incredible stuff, you guys. I've talked to people from all over the world, and we're bringing that for you guys to decide if it's valid in your life or not. Also, make sure to check out the Thunderbolts project on YouTube, thunderbolts.info, as well as holoscience.com. Be the change you want to see. Have a fantastic day. Talk to you soon. Wall, it's an honor to have you on the show here with us at the Leak Project. You've got a beautiful website, actually two websites that are really nice. I love your YouTube channel. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd recommend going to thunderbolts.info. Got a plethora of intel. How the heck are you?
I'm fine. Thanks, Rex. Thanks for the call.
Absolutely. It's just an honor to speak with you. I am not well-versed in the electric universe. I've heard a little bit of that theory before, and it certainly makes a lot of sense. With the little that I do know about it, I can definitely relate. If you would, for our audience, tell them a little bit about yourself, and then we'll segue into your work.
Okay. It's not unusual that people don't know much about the electric universe because, of course, all of our cosmology at present completely ignores electricity. You won't find it in any index or in any glossy book on the Big Bang, which is quite odd when you think about it, because all of the matter that we are made up of and the Earth's made up and stars are made up from are all made up of charged particles. And the basic idea of the electric universe is that if you try and apply a simple repeated pattern both downwards into the subatomic particles and also up to galaxies, you can see repeated patterns and ones which are easy to identify once you allow electricity to enter into the discussion. The way I came to this was perhaps a little odd, but a great number of people I've found know about Velikovsky and his book Worlds in Collision, which was a bestseller in 1950 for months on end. That is until the Harvard mafia managed to have the publisher, Macmillan, a technical book publisher, burn the books and hand it over to a popular publisher, Doubleday. So book burning still occurs, and it gives you an idea that cosmology and this trying to understand how we fit in the universe is more of a religious pursuit than a scientific one in most instances. Now, what Velikovsky did was to take a forensic approach to all of the most ancient information that he could get hold of from around the world and came to certain conclusions about the recent history of the solar system. Now, of course, we're told this bedtime story about how the solar system was created about 4.5 billion years ago. And of course, when you push things that far back in time, you can make up any story you like.
Exactly.
And the interesting thing is, of course, that the theory just doesn't work. You know, I attend meetings by professional astronomers here in Canberra, and an expert on planet formation theory and the formation of the solar system admitted that you needed a different theory for every planet. The solar system is a complete fruit salad of objects. There is no real gradation from the sun outwards, which is what you'd expect if the planets are just formed from the leftovers. And when I mentioned the solar system, of course, now we've got over 3,500 exoplanetary systems that have been discovered over recent years, and we appear to be an odd one out because the exoplanetary systems throw up even more mysteries and throw into doubt this bedtime story, once upon a time 4.5 billion years ago. So the thing that Velikovsky did was he threw down a gauntlet to astronomers, and they didn't bother to pick it up. They just got up in the pulpit and said, no, it disobeys Newton's laws. But you've got to remember that all of these so-called laws are man-made, and they're generally restricted to a view which is what they call geocentric. In other words, our conditions on Earth are extrapolated out into the galaxies as if we can do that without any consequences. And of course you can't, because when you look at galaxies, they don't behave according to Newton's law. So just extrapolating Newton's law out into deep space doesn't work, which should have provided some sense of humility in the astronomers. But rather than that, no, they just discarded what Velikovsky had discovered, and that was that Venus was recognized globally by all ancient cultures as having been the archetypal comet, the doomsday comet, which means that Venus is a new addition to the solar system, if you like. So the solar system does have a recent history, and the old bedtime story is just that. It's a fairy story. The electric universe grew out of trying to explain how you could have an object within human memory on a cometary orbit now having the most circular orbit in the solar system. And Velikovsky felt that electricity and magnetism played a principal role in providing this clockwork regularity that we see today. And it's taken me a lifetime to come to a satisfactory conclusion with the help, pardon me, with the help of a lot of people who have been marginalized over the years for coming up with so-called outrageous ideas. Sometimes the truth is more outrageous than anything anyone can dream up as a fiction story. And
Sure.
the electric universe certainly fits that category. However, the test of any good theory is, does it successfully predict and also explain new discoveries without inventing new forces, new particles, new fudge factors at every turn? The electric universe has been able to accommodate all of the findings in recent years, both from space and in particle physics. It can accommodate them quite easily simply by painting a picture of our real place in the universe. And that's what the electric universe is all about.
Well, I'm thinking about how if everything breaks down to a vibrational frequency, I guess that's a form of electricity in a sense?
Well, the connection between all matter is electrical. Fundamentally, it's all electrical. You know, an atom holds together because the electrons are drawn towards the protons in the nucleus. And in galaxies, it's quite easy to show, and in fact, it's been done with peer-reviewed research in Electrical Engineering Journal, that galaxies are effectively very simple electric motors. They're Faraday motors. And then that raises the question, where does the energy come to turn these motors? Where is the electrical energy coming from? And the simple answer is we don't know, except that you can trace the power lines with radio telescopes. The problem is, of course, that because cosmology is more of a religious pursuit and it's driven by beliefs, no one has yet been able to let go of the idea that the magnetic fields that we see everywhere in space somehow are just magically there, when we all know, electrical engineers know in particular, that magnetism requires an electric current or electric motion of particles to generate them.
Well, you said that earlier that the universe, you brought up the 4 billion year old mark, because a lot of scientists say 4 billion, I've heard 6, 7, etc. How old is the universe?
Well, we're talking there, or I was talking about the age of the solar system, which is estimated at 4.5 billion years. However, all of these estimates are based on stories that were made up at the beginning of the 20th century. And the basic problem they faced then was, how do you keep the sun burning long enough to produce all of the erosion and all of the sculpting we see on the Earth? You know, if you the 4.5 billion years refers to the age of the solar system. In other words, that's supposed to be the age of the Earth. But all of these estimates of ages are based on the bedtime story. And the bedtime story was developed at the beginning of the 20th century to answer how the sun could burn for 4.5 billion years, because at that stage the geologists had said it would take hundreds of millions, maybe even 1,000 million years or 1 billion years for some of these features we see on Earth to have had time to form, if you assume that the forces we see in action today are the only forces that have ever acted on the Earth, which is a pretty rash assumption. So when nuclear energy came along, of course, they suddenly said, we found an energy source that could last for that length of time. But of course, then Eddington, who gave us the standard model of the interior of the sun, had the sheer arrogance to say it should not be too difficult to understand something as simple as a star, which was based on the idea that you have just a ball of hydrogen and helium self-gravitating, and somehow or another it forms enough pressure and heat in the center to start nuclear reactions. Now, all of this was just sheer conjecture. We're unable to repeat the hypothesized nuclear reactions in any laboratory on Earth to test that idea. And of course, one of the greatest bits of evidence against this idea that somehow the sun is up there just trying to shed itself of internal energy is when you look at sunspots. That's a region of the bright photosphere that's been pushed aside, and you can see much deeper, and it's dark down there. It's cooler, which suggests that whatever is inside is not trying to release energy out into space, and that whatever a star is something reacting to its environment. And this is one of the aspects of the electric universe that's very important, because we propose that stars are an electrical discharge phenomenon, primarily. Of course, nuclear reactions are taking place, but they are mediated by electrical power coming in from deep space. And this also can be tested by radio telescopes, and there's one radio astronomer in particular, Gerrit Verschuur, who has shown pretty definitively that the magnetic fields you can trace in space are actually showing us the local wiring of the circuit, if you like. And you can do the same for galaxies and also see the wiring circuits for galaxies. It's a completely electrical picture. And of course, once you have stars that are powered externally, there is no standard evolutionary story of stars and their ages. A star is a child of its environment. It is not subject to gradually consuming itself. This is an interesting and a completely different way of looking at the universe. It's a way of looking at it as a connected whole. You know, we're all part of this gigantic circuitry. And of course, the evidence for that also is in these pictures you see of the shape of the galaxy, and it's all made up of very fine filaments, all streaking around. Now, gravity doesn't form filaments naturally. It forms spherical objects because gravity always is a radial force. But electric currents flowing in space are filamentary, just like you see in those little novelty plasma balls. And they're also dynamic. They move. And that also is an important feature.
So when you see different types of stars, whether it be a brown dwarf, I've seen the official version of stars, and you've got the ones that have lived their life supposedly, and now they're just basically roaming in space at not nearly the heat. And then you've got some that go hypernova, etc. And if you look at our own sun right now, it seems different than it was 20 years ago. But I think that just has to do with the geoengineering.
Yes, well, that's another aspect. When I said earlier that each planet in the solar system needs a different theory, each different type of star has a different theory to explain it. And it's very complicated and has a huge number of fudge factors, which means that virtually it's it's unfalsifiable. So you can make up a story, and if it doesn't fit, you just add a few more knobs to twiddle, and you'll have a new story with new forces, new particles, new reactions, whatever. In other words, it's a complication rather than a simplification, which was the aim of classical science before it went off the rails at the beginning of the 20th century.
Okay.
The electric universe explains all stars as variations on the low-pressure gas discharge model. And we're actually testing that model in an experiment called the Sapphire experiment, which you can see information about that on the thunderbolts.info website. And if that, we've already done phase 1, and that was very promising, the results from that. Now we're doing phase 2, which is a much bigger, scaled-up version of the experiment. And if that turns out the way I expect, it means that's the end of stellar physics as we know it now. And it will also mean that we will understand our own star better. We'll understand how we are caught up in the sun's circuit, and therefore our weather, our climate, and all of that kind of stuff is driven by that circuit, which gives you some idea that the scaremongering for climate change is misguided. The climate changes. It's not under our control. And what we need to do is to find ways of ameliorating any effects that happen to disturb us, like getting too warm or getting too cold. And we're just as likely to get too cold as we are to get too warm. And the geological record shows that this is the kind of thing that's happened in the past. I think the best thing that can be said about the climate change people is that at least they're trying to clean up our act because we have a very bad habit of messing in our own nest.
Absolutely. And definitely the media likes to push two sides of extremes. You know, they make it look as if you have one of two choices. You can either join the side on the right that says humans have absolutely nothing to do with anything on the Earth changes, and then you have the exact opposite of that. And if you go back 100 years in big cities where they had to, you know, basically burn a lot of coal and other things, I mean, it's going to affect the atmosphere and the air that you're breathing. Just look at certain places in China when those big giant corporations and industries building those computer parts and toxic stuff, etc. Yet, as far as the global scheme of things, like you're saying, that's connected at a level to where it's not going to be something that you and I can have a really big impact on, if any at all. So now you do see chemtrails out there today in geoengineering, and I'm not referring to the contrails. There's definitely two different things, and whether you want to pitch that, whether they pitch that to the powers that be as to create a cooling type effect or make clouds so it would cool the Earth, I don't know, but it doesn't seem to be helping. I mean, it seems like the sun is more intense now than it used to be. Am I off on that? Have you noticed that at all? Or
the solar activity has changed, and any change in the sun will have an effect on our climate, even though the output of the sun remains fairly steady in terms of heat and light. One of the aspects of the electrical model of the sun and other stars, other bright stars, is that the photosphere acts like a transistor and controls the heat and light output. But if you look at the sun in X-rays, our sun is a variable star, and the X-ray input is actually a gauge of whether you're going to see sunspots or not. So the two go hand in hand in some respects. And that means because the Earth and all of the planets are caught up in the sun's circuit, we get some of the after effects. And that can mean changes in the climate. And in the past, when we've had very few sunspots for an extended period of time, we have had a mini ice age, they called it. So we could be heading to cold rather than heat. To say that we are responsible for warming the Earth denies the geological evidence as well, which shows that the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere follows the change in temperature. It doesn't precede it.
Right.
So the electric universe is really a more holistic way of looking at science. That's why I call my website Holoscience, because it's a holistic, covers all different aspects of our existence and all different disciplines. In fact, one of the problems with science today is the specialization, because you have experts in one field who mislead experts in other fields, and generally there's a reluctance to tread on the toes of anyone in another field, so you keep quiet, even though you may have misgivings about the information you're being given. So there is a tendency for experts in one field to experiment on us and the Earth based on total ignorance of other areas of science which should be considered. That's particularly in the area of bioengineering and that kind of thing, you know, where we don't understand life yet, but we're quite happy to tinker genetically with plants and animals.
We can't figure it out. Let's just blow it up.
Yeah, that's right. We've had a bad habit of doing that. I mean, even the first attempts to produce nuclear fission, the experimenters there were, you know, holding 2 bits of uranium-235 in their hands and bring them together and watch it flash, and then they wondered why they died shortly after. It was this kind of playing with fire, which we have a tendency to do.
Yeah.
And one of the things about the electric universe is that it brings all of these various disciplines, it knocks down the barriers, even between the sciences and the arts, because Velikovsky showed that the arts and the history of ancient peoples has a heck of a lot to teach us about our real situation in the universe. And it's fascinating.
Yeah, I'd definitely like to get into that in a moment. One other question I'd like to ask before that, though, is what about shooting stars and black holes? I guess that's 2 questions.
Well, the shooting stars are just fragments of the planetary fragments that have been lofted into space by interplanetary discharges, and we'll talk a lot about that later. The black holes are what you get when you just use mathematics to try and explain what's going on in a galaxy, which is an electric motor using gravity, which is so weak that even a tiny magnet can lift matter away from the 6 sextillion tons of the Earth. Gravity is so weak a force that if you want to do the things that are required to hold a galaxy together gravitationally, you have to postulate something which is almost infinitely dense and infinitely massive. And once you involve infinities, you are no longer doing physics, because infinity is not a number, it's just a concept. You don't need black holes in the electric universe simply because as plasma physicists and electrical engineers who've worked in plasma experiments know, there's a very simple device which has got 2 concentric cylinders, and you initiate a high voltage discharge between those 2 cylinders. And what happens is you get this radial streamers, equally spaced, racing down the 2 cylinders until it reaches the other end. It balloons out beyond the cylinders, and then it collapses back into the very center of the 2 of those cylinders and forms a tiny donut. Now, you can concentrate all of the energy of a room full of capacitors, and that's a colossal amount of energy, into something which is a millimeter or so across and shaped like a tiny donut. And that stores all of that electromagnetic energy. Now, E equals mc squared says if you've got a lot of energy in a tiny space, then it appears like a lot of mass. But the behavior of galaxies, too, is not explained gravitationally by black holes, because what you see are active galaxies spewing material out along the axis, the rotational axis. And this is a feature of these plasma gun experiments, where the little plasmoid, the little donut, finally gets so intense it decays, the particles start to collide with one another, and it shoots beams of neutrons and radiation out along the axis. So the electrical engineers are the people who should be doing cosmology these days, and the mathematicians should be retired to the back room where they belong, because even the mathematics of black holes is nonsense. The space that Newton worked with is the space we recognize. That is 3 dimensions, it's flat. You can superimpose a star and planets in your model and it all works. You can superimpose as many objects as you like and the theory still works. A black hole, you've seen those illustrations in books and shown on television ad nauseum.
Oh, yeah.
Where you see that funnel shape with a sun or star at the bottom and the Earth is perched somewhere up on the funnel. That is an example of the shape of the space that a black hole occupies. And that space, which is called asymptotically flat, cannot be superimposed on flat space or on another asymptotically flat space. So you cannot have any other object in the universe but a black hole. Mathematically, it doesn't work to put another black hole there. So the idea that these gravitational waves that are recently so-called discovered was due to 2 coalescing black holes is sheer nonsense, mathematically and physically.
Do you think wormholes are possible?
No. You can't warp space. I mean, space is a concept of 3 dimensions. If you go adding another dimension, just point me in that direction, because it has to have direction, and you have to be able to measure it with a ruler. Otherwise, it's not a dimension. This is one of the problems with mathematics. They say mathematics is the language of science. No, it's not. Unless you can describe each of the symbols on that blackboard in real physical terms, in flat space, and with no messing around with time, then you do not have any understanding of it. So even E equals mc squared, the equation best known to the public, is not understood by scientists because they have no definition for energy or mass in terms of the structure of matter. You won't find a definition in any textbook or encyclopedia, simply because there is none. So our physics today has been taken over by people who are not suited or trained, actually, to do science. Mathematics is a different discipline. It's more like learning how to be a champion chess player than it is to actually understand the universe.
Okay. And if I could ask this, I'm trying to grasp why it has to be a flat universe.
Simply because the mathematics of Newton's theory of gravity requires a flat space for you to be able to, say, put the Earth in orbit around the Sun, because otherwise the equations are meaningless if you try and substitute a body which is only exists in a different shape space. But to talk of different shape space is beyond our comprehension anyway, which means that we are talking, what would you call it, figuratively, when we talk about warp space, and it's really meaningless because there is no explanation in this warp space idea to explain why a body should move, because warp space can't exert a force. So the Earth perched on that funnel edge, or somewhere down the funnel, has no reason for it to move in any direction at all. It can just sit there. So the theory of the mathematical theories are generally divorced from anything real physically. Now, mathematics, of course, is very valuable once you have a really good physical model to underpin it. That's when you're doing real science. But the mathematicians should not be the ones making statements about what their mathematics means. It requires what they used to call in the old days the natural philosophers and the experimental physicists, the ones like Faraday. And we've more or less lost the plot. It's become, instead of after the Second World War, they used to say that science had become shut up and calculate. With the advent of computers, it's become shut up and simulate. And we all know how easy it is for computers nowadays to generate a virtual reality that looks real on the big screen, but which has no reality to underpin it. So we have more or less lost the way of doing science, which was the science of Faraday and Maxwell and people like that.
So if everything breaks down into the electric hypothesis, essentially, does that mean that there's a positive and negative discharge in everything, or there's opposites to each?
Of course, once you've established the model for the electric universe, there are still the big mysteries. How far down can you go with the structure of matter to explain the things that we observe? And if it's a repeated pattern, how many little orbiting systems of charge can you have within each particle? These are questions which remain for the future. And when you go up into the big scale, you notice that galaxies behave like electric motors, and they're also connected by these gigantic circuits. And of course, this has been shown to fit with the discovery that the rotation axes of galaxies now tend to be lined up. The rotation axes of, the rotation axes of quasars too, tend to be lined up over vast distances, which is what you'd expect if they're all strung out like beads on a string. Stars are formed like beads on a string. All of this is a repeated pattern, and it's easily explained electrically, but it has no explanation gravitationally. That may not have answered your question quite, but the electric universe simplifies things the way Faraday and the pioneers did, and that is they try and reduce the number of forces, reduce the number of particles, and come up with a simple model that explains everything we see using the least number of assumptions. The electric universe shows that the electric force is the only force you need to explain gravity, magnetism, the nuclear force, and so on. Magnetism and gravity turn out to be what happens when you have neutral matter, which is made up of negative and positive charge, but the positive charge is slightly offset from the negative charge in such a way that you form little, what are known as electric dipoles, like little magnets. And of course, magnetism is an electric dipolar force. That's why you can't have a monopole. They keep searching for these things like searching for the Holy Grail, but you won't find one because magnetism is an electric dipole force. The same for gravity, and that has huge repercussions for our understanding of the sun and the planets, because what happens is that once a body is formed by powerful electromagnetic forces in these molecular clouds, like beads on a string, both planets and stars are formed in the same process. And once the discharge moves on, because as you know in the little plasma ball, these filaments move around, and it's recently been discovered that the stars get left behind, but the stars are moving, scattered like buckshot, I think was the term the plasma physicists used, and they capture one another. And this is why the exoplanetary systems look quite crazy. You know, they've got planets orbiting over the poles of a star and orbiting backwards and all sorts of strange things. So it's the electrical forces that create these bodies in the first instance, and once they're formed, all of the atoms within that body, the nuclei, are 2,000 times heavier, or the particles, the protons and the neutrons that make up the nucleus of an atom, are 2,000 times more massive than the electrons that are in orbit around those nuclei. So that in a gravitational field, which you cannot shield from, the nuclei will drift towards the centre of the Earth, which means that they will be offset slightly within each atom, slightly offset towards the inside of the Earth. That means that each atom looks like a tiny little electric dipole, or looks like a magnet, if you like, with the positive pole facing inwards and the negative pole facing outwards, which means that all bodies in the universe have the same polarity facing outwards. They tend to repel one another, which means that Newton's law of gravity works when you're standing on the Earth, because we're attracted to it like an iron filing is to a magnet. It doesn't care whether it's the North or South Pole. It'll be attracted equally to the nearest one that's more powerful. But once you get away from the Earth, the Moon will have the same pole facing the Earth. The Earth will be repelling the Sun will be repelling the planets. So you say, well, what holds it all together? And the answer is all of the matter in the rest of the universe. And this theory was actually put forward by a colleague of Newton. So even Sir Isaac Newton considered this idea as a possibility, and it works. The same equation works. And it also raises a very interesting issue, and that is that it means you don't need a Big Bang for the universe to be stable. The problem with gravity being only an attractive force is that you have somehow to separate all the matter in an initial creation event, whatever that was, and then afterwards it will try and all fall back to where it came from. Just like, you toss something into the air and it will fall back to Earth. However, if you look at gravity as being like a magnet, then you face the same poles of two magnets together and try and push them together. You can feel that force that avoids, it avoids them coming together. So this explains why the universe, which was shown by Helton Arp, the astronomer, who worked with Hubble, he showed definitively from his observational research, which is more important than theoretical sitting in front of a computer research, that the universe appears to be stable, static, not expanding. And he himself said that the only answer to this is if somehow gravity is repulsive on the large scale. So this paints a completely different picture. Helton Arp's work was accepted by Sir Fred Hoyle and Margaret and Geoffrey Burbidge, the astronomers, and a number of other well-versed astronomers based on his observational work. But the theorists didn't want a bar of it, so they used statistics to try and discredit Helton Arp's work. Unfortunately, Helton Arp died last year, I think it was, which is very sad because he is of the stature of any of the giants of the past, in my opinion. In fact, a lot of people who knew of him called him the modern-day Galileo.
You know, and one of the things that I wanted to ask you about also is you brought up Venus earlier and how the ancient people looked at it like it was a comet that was going to end the world, and that's basically making me think about Nibiru and Planet X and all the hysteria that's going on with that anomaly, that planet. So talk to us about how that would explain the electric universe. Did it like attract it somehow? I mean, did the different planet or something attract Venus into this solar system essentially?
No, the story of the recent history of the solar system involves the capture by the sun of a brown dwarf and its entourage of satellites, or planets, if you like. And it requires a complete, you have to come to it with a beginner's mind, because if you start sitting there thinking up objections, you will miss all of the aspects of the story that make it coherent and plausible. The first thing to understand is that a comet is a body that is electrically discharging because it's traveling from one part of the solar system, the outer solar system, towards the inner solar system. And as it comes into the inner solar system, it's speeding up until it whips around the sun. Now, as you move through the solar plasma, which surrounds the sun right out to the boundary with the interstellar space, you are entering regions where the voltage is changing slightly. Now, it only has to be millivolts per kilometre, and it adds up to a substantial voltage over the traverse from the outer solar system to in nearer the sun. And what happens is that the body itself begins to try and establish equilibrium with its environment, and in doing so, it begins to discharge. And the first visual evidence is the production of a coma, as they call it, which is what's known as a plasma sheath. And that plasma sheath can be huge. In fact, I forget which comet it was, a recent one, the big spherical coma was as big as the sun. It gives you some idea, which shows that it's an electrical event, nothing to do with a little piece of rock, maybe a kilometre or two across. There's no way that gravity could handle something the size of the sun and attach it to a body a couple of kilometres across. But electrically, the forces involved are able to do that quite easily. Now, as it gets in closer to the sun, the discharge, the voltage at the surface can be sufficient to start stripping electrons from the surface, and that will strip atoms as well. And that's what we've been observing. Of course, minerals, rocky minerals, have oxygen in them, and oxygen atoms are stripped off. They combine with the hydrogen from the solar wind, and you get what's called the OH radical. And that's what's measured, and it's decided that that is water coming from the comet. It's not. It's a bit of the plasma chemistry that goes on surrounding a discharging body in the solar system. Okay, that's a bit complicated maybe, but a comet is a giant electrical discharging body. Now, in the process of discharging, it's also altering the mass and the gravity of that object in such a way that it's circularizing the orbit. And this is why Venus today has no circular orbit. And just last month or so, astronomers expressed surprise to find that electrons are still leaving Venus 5 times more strongly than they are leaving the Earth, and stripping oxygen atoms off Venus still. So this gives you a good idea that the cometary discharge model is correct. So Venus established a circular orbit quite rapidly, but in the process, of course, it was passing near the Earth and Mars and creating a certain amount of havoc. So all of the ancient stories of the planetary gods, Mars and Venus and so on, have aspects of them which refer to what was witnessed by the ancients. In fact, Mars, with that colossal gash that runs a third of the way around the planet and called Valles Marineris, is one of those scars. And the North American Indians, the name for Mars was Scarface. The Homeric story of Achilles being wounded in the heel, in other words, being scarred, also is a kind of reference to that. So mankind actually witnessed the...
Oh, I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm sorry to interrupt. I was just going to say, isn't it also called or Mars is referred to as the god of war? Yes,
that's right, because it seemed to be involved in exchanges with Venus and the Earth. Mars with its sword, the sword itself is a symbol of the electrical discharge that was seen emanating from Mars, because it's not like normal lightning. In space, when you, in that very thin plasma, it takes a different form, and it can be quite complicated at times. And it was a big breakthrough in 2000 when we had an expert in high-energy plasma discharge phenomena come to our conference, and he was absolutely blown away when he saw the imagery we were showing. He said, this is classified information. He said, this fits the images we get on X-rays with an X-ray telescope when we perform these experiments where we funnel more energy than all the power stations on Earth into something the size of a baked bean tin, and we stand about a kilometre away looking at it through a telescope. These are the forms that we see, and that really changed his life, because he then instituted a search around the world and with a lot of volunteers to document the rock carvings and their GPS positions and the pictures of the horizon. His aim was to recreate in 3D the motion of this apparition in the sky in the past. I'm sure it would make a fantastic IMAX movie one day when somebody has the courage to do it.
Absolutely. You know, and that makes me wonder also about the Grand Canyon. I've heard the hypothesis of that was actually caused by the some electric discharge of other planets. And then you think about the possibility of, if planets are causing all of this chaos and stuff like that, does that relate to the Greek pantheos and the different mythos of the Sumerian tablets, the Greek gods, etc.?
Yes. Yeah.
Let's get into that.
David Talbot says there was a myth-making era, and it was unique. There was nothing like it happened afterwards. It was a period of mankind's history that was completely beyond our modern experience. And of course, this creates a problem for the mathematicians, because they like to be able to retro-calculate. But of course, if the solar system only has a history as we see it today, going back, say, 12 to 20,000 years, then, you know, all bets are off. You can't retro-calculate what happened on Earth beyond that sort of timescale. And unfortunately, this creates a problem for geologists, because their descriptive science only became a hard science when they started putting dates on things. But those dates are generally retro-calculated and based on the idea that the Earth has not been seriously disturbed over all of that time. And there is no evidence that that's the case. In fact, the evidence is diametrically opposed to that.
Do you think that there could be a possibility that because of the way the world turns in the electric universe, that there could be this kind of attraction if we could pull in another planet or something, and there could be more chaos in the future like there was many years ago?
What happened all those thousands of years ago was the entry of a brown dwarf into the solar system. And of course, the stars being an electrical phenomenon, when you get a dwarf star, and when I say dwarf, they're only dwarfs because astronomers equate brightness with, or luminosity with, the mass of an object. And therefore, when brown dwarfs were shown to have quite low luminosity, it was said, oh, they must be low mass, and therefore they'd be quite small. They'd appear small. But that's not the case. In an electric discharge, when a body is trying to gather more charge from a very rare gas, or rarefied gas, the electrode, the surface of the body, the discharge begins to leave the body and expands to gather enough charge. It's a little complicated to explain. It really needs a diagram. But what it means is that a brown dwarf is a planetary-sized object inside a vast envelope, which is glowing because it's accepting electrical energy from its surroundings. If, for instance, Jupiter were to become a brown dwarf, and it probably was in its earlier history, and you lit up its present magnetosphere, it would appear when it's in opposition to be as big as the sun. So when you talk about these brown dwarfs, they are not, if we ever get to see one up close, they're not dwarfs at all. And if you think about Jupiter, if its magnetosphere was lit up, well, the inner moons, the Galilean moons, would be orbiting within the star, if you like. We wouldn't be able to see them. We may see their movement as kind of star spots, if you like, on that red glowing envelope. in the electric universe, that is the place where you're most likely to find life, because you have all of the conditions you would wish. Instead of being in a narrow Goldilocks zone, which is a pretty unsafe place to be, like we are today, you are sitting in what is more like a cosmic womb, which is being lit equally on all every square meter of the body. It doesn't matter how you're spinning or how your axis is oriented. You'll receive the same energy over the whole body. The light that falls on each body will be concentrated in the red and infrared, which is ideal for photosynthesis. And the corollary of that is, of course, that this plasma envelope will not let radio waves through. It would act like a metal reflector. So it would suggest that the SETI experiment, looking for life in the universe, is doomed to failure using radio waves because they will not penetrate these plasma sheaths or shields around these brown dwarf stars. The other thing is that brown dwarfs flare. They change in brightness. Their only way of adjusting to changes in their environment is to actually eject matter. And so, and also the spectra that you see of red dwarfs has all of the things you require for life. It has carbon compounds, it has water, and so on, and presumably gases too. And that explains how bodies like the Earth and the moons of Jupiter and Saturn became so icy. In fact, Saturn right now was the brown dwarf that we were associated with. It was Saturn that gave us life. And of course, its rings are water ice, and the Earth has an awful lot of water, which cannot be explained by the traditional leftovers model of planet formation. And being where we are fairly close to the sun, the standard model would suggest that all of the hydrogen would have been blown away, so we could have very little water on a body like the Earth. Instead, we find ourselves with a considerable ocean and an atmosphere which is conducive to life. So, as I say, the electric universe, coupled with this forensic approach to all of the information available to us about how the sky appeared in the past, paints an entirely different picture to the bedtime story one. And it's an exciting one because it also shows more clearly how we are an integral part of the electric universe. The standard model has us isolated by time and distance, vast distances and vast times, and it makes us feel isolated, insignificant, and disconnected. The electric universe turns it all around and says, no, we are connected, we're a part of the universe, and also because the electric force to form stable, we were talking earlier about resonances, stable, resonant matter and systems of planets and galaxies and so on, must operate far faster than the speed of light. And that's shown by the fact that gravity must operate far in excess of the speed of light. Otherwise, the Earth will be orbiting empty space where the sun was 8.5 minutes ago, rather than where it is now. The astronomer Tom Van Flandern calculated, based on the most stringent test of his idea, that is a pair of binary stars orbiting one another very closely, that for that system to remain stable over the period of time that they've been observed required that the speed of light, the speed of gravity was 20 billion times the speed of light. And the work of Halton Arp also, with his with respect to his quasars, showed that the speed of light must be far in excess. Sorry, the speed of gravity, once again, is far in excess of the speed of light, because this light is a disturbance in a medium. And you know yourself, if you pull a rope taut and you wave one end, the wave takes time to get to the other end of the rope. But if you tug on the rope, the other end feels it much faster. It's very similar. The direct electric force is as near instantaneous as you care to think. And it also explains the quantum weirdness that's associated with particles that are separated over kilometers, and you change one, you flip it or something, and the other one responds instantaneously. Now, physicists don't like this because it means that Einstein was wrong, that his speed of light is not a speed limit. And this is where we run into one of the difficulties of 20th century science, is that by setting up people as, the ultimate genius, it removes all questioning of their work, which is nonsense, because science progresses by having more than one idea at a time as to have a competition. And this is one of the things that would help education and drawing kids back to science too, is to provide them with arguments for and against two ideas and let them make up their minds and get them thinking instead of just parroting what they've been taught as so-called facts. I'm afraid you range far and wide when you ask questions in the electric universe, because it has ramifications. It has ramifications culturally, historically, scientifically, artistically. We have a lot of artists involved as well in the electric universe, but they're drawn to it because they can see the connections. Even it gets down to biological systems as well, and a lot of the natural therapies. And you begin to see that their language at present is not considered scientific, only because the scientists themselves have no language to explain things like quantum entanglement. When they say non-locality and entanglement, they are meaningless words. Non-locality is meaningless. It just means these two things are connected. It's as simple as that.
Sure. Well, I want to ask you too. I mean, this is incredible. This is fascinating. When I think of the red and blue Kachinas that have been discussed for thousands of years, or at least since the Hopis.
Yes.
And you talk about Saturn and life on Earth comes from Saturn. I had Jordan Maxwell on the show the other day. We were discussing the cult of Saturn and how powerful it is. He said that many millennia ago that Saturn took up a quarter of the skies. It was just huge. And now you're telling me this, and it just seems to be piggybacking off of what he said. But we were talking more about the metaphysical aspect. And
yes.
Now I'm wondering if Saturn was the red Kachina or the blue Kachina.
The Kachinas are a representation of the planetary gods, I think. Of course, since my area is mostly the scientific, the other key members of the group, the mytho-historians we call them, are the people to talk about those in detail. But certainly the imagery, sculptures around the world, all of them can be analysed in some detail in terms of the stories about these planetary gods.
Do you think Nibiru is real?
No, it's a reflection of what happened in the past. One of the things that Velikovsky picked up on was that when something which threatens your very existence occurs to an individual, the response of the mind is to generally suffer amnesia. So you don't consciously remember what it was that caused such fear, that your brain sort of shuts down. He said, the problem is, though, for those people, and he said, I think you can say this happened to the entire human race, and therefore you can put the entire human race on the psychiatrist's couch. He said that the problem is that people who have suffered like that often revisit subconsciously what happened, and they either try and vicariously re-experience it, which is dangerous when you think about it, if you're trying to recreate doomsday, and you then begin to understand our warlike behaviour, which is it's quite insane. There's no sanity at all about war, but it is the ultimate destructive behaviour. And he said this is the big danger, and the only way to try and fix the problem in an individual, he said in the human race as well, is to begin to understand what that past event was and come to terms with it. Otherwise, you continue to vicariously repeat the experience and then undergo some sort of catharsis, and you feel okay. And you can understand then why there are so many disaster movies these days, because they vicariously invite us to consider the destruction of the Earth and so on. And of course, you come out of it, and we've been saved, and there's a sort of catharsis. And you also understand too, I think, why all the exhilaration and dancing in the streets and ticker tape and everything when peace was declared after the Second World War. And much the same in the First World War, I suppose. It's a kind of catharsis from a reenactment. Now, reenacting doomsday is a damn dangerous thing to do, especially when you've got nuclear weapons now to play with, and you can try and emulate the destructive power of the old planetary gods who could, rip the Grand Canyon out of the surface of America in a few minutes. That is not the sort of thing I feel happy about, and I feel it very strongly that one of the chief benefits that will come from an understanding of the electric universe is an understanding of our history and why we behave the way we do now. Because I think otherwise the human race doesn't have a long-term future.
I've certainly wondered that before, and I think sometimes that maybe our DNA has like code packets essentially of maybe not necessarily past lives, but somebody else's, or just different parts of this electric universe essentially. I mean, you've heard of the Akashic records that have been talked about for thousands of years, and really what you're saying, as scientific as it is, I think is so many different occult-like sayings, such as above, so below, and it all kind of comes together, man. It's fascinating.
Yeah, I'm often contacted by people who are schooled in the so-called occult, and they say it's remarkable how closely what you've come up with scientifically matches what these ancient people seem to be trying to tell us. And I said, well, that's what I would hope, because if you have the correct model, then all of these mysteries should be cleared up, and the connection should be become clear, or clearer. And I think it gives a sense of adventure in discovery, and also is a great kind of peace, because you begin to understand what the human race has suffered and how we've managed to come through it all, but we still are damaged, and I just want to see the damage repaired so that we can become useful citizens of the universe. That's one of the other aspects of the electric universe, is because gravity, I said before, travels much faster than light. The reason is, of course, this direct electrical connection with the rest of the universe. All matter in the universe is connected, and this gets down to implications for memory, consciousness, past lives, all that kind of stuff. Because the universe is not empty. There's no such thing as empty space. To be able to transfer light through a vacuum requires that there is a medium in that vacuum. You can't wave nothing. You can't have a vacuum with dielectric characteristics without there being matter in that vacuum. So it changes our picture of the universe completely.
This is fascinating, and it makes me wonder if it's almost like a simulation. We're in this computer simulation. Even if you look at DNA and how it breaks down into a quad system, essentially, not binary, but quad system. Now, what is your take on the afterlife, being a scientist? Maybe I shouldn't ask you this question.
Well, the evidence by those people who've done the most investigation has been that there is a memory which exists beyond your present existence. It's almost like whatever we are is much more than what we appear. The idea of there being an aura somehow connected with us, well, you can understand that if there is this medium that's necessary even in empty space. It will be, if it's a material medium, it will have some slight attraction to any ponderable body within the medium, and that suggests that it is possible to have an aura. All of these things can be looked at scientifically anyway once you apply the electric universe model, because it gives you ideas of ways you may test or even devise test instruments and ways of measuring things, which is what science is all about. So if it's a material, if the universe is full, whatever it is, the electric universe suggests that it's neutrinos, and those neutrinos will have a complex structure, because to be able to generate a particle and its mirror particle, like an electron and a positron in empty space when it wasn't there before, means that there must have been the parts to make up those objects already there. That's a principle of physics. You cannot create something from nothing, and you cannot make something completely disappear. So this is one of the areas where mathematicians have discarded physics and just gone their merry way, and they talk about particles and antiparticles, and when they collide, they annihilate. you cannot do that and still call it physics. The electric universe points out that this medium must have all of the parts required to make up the subatomic particles that we're made up from. Okay, so once you get that in your head, you can then say, well, these neutrinos, if you like, this medium that we're surrounded by, are resonant structures. They have to be, otherwise they would fall apart and they'd split and the bits go everywhere. Those resonant particles are capable of holding information. Any resonant system is capable of holding information. So we're surrounded by the intelligence and the information from the rest of the universe. This is one reason why I think when those great wipeouts occurred on Earth, and most of the animals and life forms were wiped out, and then almost miraculously all these other life forms took their place. The reason for that is that the information is out there in the universe, and it will take advantage of an environment that is suitable for life. It already has the templates available. DNA is not the template for life. It's an assembly line. It's a shop floor, if you like. And you need the blueprints to be given to it to know which machine to turn on and when to turn it on and for how long. And that's not provided internally. This gets down to Rupert Sheldrake's work on morphic resonance. The information for life is beyond the organism itself. It also gets down to Bruce Lipton's work, where he points out that the cell responds to its environment, and that environment includes signals that are not in either the bloodstream or the immediate physical environment. It's something beyond. And I would suggest that it is this medium that fills the universe.
And then you've heard of the antimatter theory. that is probably not, it doesn't have its place probably in the electric universe either, does it?
It's a misuse of language once again. There's no such thing as antimatter. There
right.
is a particle. And
how can there be antimatter?
It's a mirror particle. And if you bring a particle and its mirror particle together, then they will release the energy that was required to construct the particle in the first place, and it releases that as energy. But what's left is the neutrino, or whatever it was that was there initially, that accepted energy in the center of a galaxy to produce the particles that we're made up from. It's a kind of repeated pattern idea, wheels within wheels. At present, particle physics has gone down the plum pudding model, where they just make up names for things which are meaningless. You have up and down quarks, and you have particles with charm, and the words are totally meaningless and therefore very unhelpful, because if you don't have a physical model to do your mathematics with, then any results you get are, you can't describe them in real terms. And this is typical of what's happening today. Of course, they give Nobel Prizes now for inventing new particles and new forces, but that is entirely the wrong way to go to do science. It should be all about simplification.
Wouldn't that be nice? I mean, look at all the laws today. You've got 50 billion laws, yet they've got to find more ones to come up with to make it safer. It's retarded. And I'm looking at your YouTube channel right now, and I got to tell you, you've got some awesome videos. Folks, check out Thunderbolts Project on YouTube. I mean, almost 70,000 subscribers, some awesome podcasts. I want to know what time is. You've got a podcast about this. What is time?
Time is the concept of the number of clock intervals between two events. That's all it is. As far as time goes, there is only now. Right throughout the universe, there is a universal now. So time travel is impossible, because you'd have to rewind the entire universe or shift it forward. And good luck with that.
What about like an omniverse theory?
Sorry?
I didn't mean to interrupt again, but like, what about if you go back in time, yet you go to a different timeline, because by doing that, you create a new part of the matrix?
Yeah, no, that's all nonsense.
Dang it!
Mathematicians, unfortunately, use words which are totally misleading, like the arrow of time. Okay, you've got an arrow. Show me the direction it's pointing in, and tell me how long it is.
Yeah, right? Good point.
So, time's pointing where? And how long is it in inches?
Yeah, that's you're being too scientific, you just gotta no, that's what I like about you though, is that's what people need really sometimes. And I was saying that sarcastically, because I know a lot of people that follow things with blind faith, and they put their whole life on the line based on blind faith. And faith's good, but how much of that do you really want to have?
Yes, you're quite right about the faith aspect. It is a a pseudo-religion, modern science. It's funny because they give monumental cash prizes to scientists who bring science and religion together. I know of one particular one who was an Englishman who worked in Australia for many years, Paul Davies, written about the mind of God and so on. The funny part of it is, of course, that science and religion never parted company, because the Big Bang was invented pretty much by a Belgian priest, a Roman Catholic priest. And he was also a mathematician, so he was poorly qualified in both areas.
Of course.
And because Einstein, of course, his theory of gravity involved a force which only attracted and never repelled, he needed something like the Big Bang to make sense of his theory. And, of course, once that got started, it was all show business after that, and everyone gets caught up in show business. In fact, Fred Hoyle, about 50 years ago, said that science today is more to do with showbiz than it is with science.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And like I brought up earlier, when you've got just 6 companies that control over 90% of the scientific data that people have access to, combined with 6 companies that control 90% of the media, it's pretty easy to keep things confined. And that makes me want to talk about the cosmic symbols and stuff that you write about a lot on your website and also do podcasts on your YouTube channel. If you look at some of these ancient Sumerian texts that show the different planetary bodies, and then also even in Revelation when it talks about the different seals that are released, I would compare a lot of that to what happens in the stars. So I'm trying to grasp all that.
Yes. I don't generally discuss much beyond the plasma forms, which are everywhere. You know, a lot of the symbolism in our flags and in our religious buildings and religious icons and so on all relate to the plasma formations that were involved in the breakup of the Proto-Saturnian system. We call it Proto-Saturnian because that was the brown dwarf era.
How long do you think that lasted?
It's difficult to say. The problem is, you see, that the circuit of the sun extends from here to the nearest stars, and it would have been the same for the brown dwarf, Proto-Saturn. So it depends on where it or how it approached the solar system, and how its circuit got tangled up with the sun's. Because once the brown dwarf entered the electrical environment of the sun, and that is within the heliosphere, they call it. That's where Voyager 1 just left it a year or 2 ago. So it's a huge distance out beyond Pluto, something like, is it 100 times the Earth's orbit or 100 times Pluto's? I think it's 100 times the Earth's orbit from memory. That's the boundary of the sun's electrical influence. Now, another star coming in will also have its boundary, which is much bigger than the body itself. Once those two plasma sheaths or boundaries touch, the two bodies see each other electrically for the first time. The plasma sheaths act as electrical insulators, if you like, almost like eggshells, protecting the yolk and the bits inside the egg. These plasma sheaths shield the interior from much of the electrical goings on outside the sun's or the star's influence. So when they see each other electrically for the first time, what happened was that the sun is far more positively charged than Proto-Saturn was, the brown dwarf. So the brown dwarf suddenly switched from being a star to a comet. And in the process, the adjustment is extreme. So it ejected matter in a huge flare-up. If you remember the biblical term, let there be light, that was when things really changed. And the place was lit up with a brown dwarf flare. Now, brown dwarf flares have been observed, and some of them have been so severe that one astronomer said if you'd been a planet orbiting that object, it would have been a very bad day indeed. You know, it lit up about 10, thousands of times more than normal. It seems that Proto-Saturn's flare-up was pretty spectacular, but it wasn't lethal, which is lucky. But part of the process of adjusting to the new environment is, like we see comets doing, ejecting material, splitting into bits. And it actually split something out of its equatorial regions, which went into orbit about it. That's the origin of the symbol, the snake swallowing its tail, Ouroboros. And that was the birth of Venus. And, of course, the ring of Saturn right now are the remnants of that period, because those rings cannot have been there for billions of years. They just wouldn't last that long. No, they're quite recent. That's why they're so spectacular. But the material ejected formed the planet Venus, and it puzzled me for decades, trying to figure out how you can get such a crazy arrangement of planets that they're all got their poles facing one another. They're not in orbit anymore. It's like they're strung out like Comet Shoemaker-Levy 9 in a line. And it dawned on me, in fact, Comet Shoemaker-Levy 9 gave me the clue, because the brown dwarf would have formed this comet tail, but the discharge also changes the mass and the gravitational attraction between Saturn and the Sun, the result being that Saturn accelerated and was sort of sucked, if you like, out of the center of the orbiting system, and so the planets then trailed behind. But they were trailing behind in this phenomenal cometary tail, which was this plasma discharge that was memorialized by all the ancient races. So the whole thing must have been, at times, awe-inspiring, and at other times as frightening as all hell, because, in fact, the vision of hell comes from that period. So we had periods of great wonder, and other times where people were hiding in caves in the mountains from the bombardment of material.
Have you noticed there's like a
Sorry.
Oh, no problem. Have you noticed there's like a specific time frame from these cataclysms, or is that something that's all speculation once again?
Well, it's very difficult simply because timekeeping began after we saw the sun. Before that, when you're living inside that brown dwarf cosmic womb, there is no day or night. It's it's a dim light the whole time. It was called the purple dawn of creation because you get a mixture of red light and the violet end of the spectrum, the ultraviolet, due to the electrical discharge nature. And once we saw the sun, the thing that happened was that as we drew closer to the sun, trailing along behind Saturn, Saturn began to develop a what would you call it? It's like a fractional moon. It was lit up on one side by a few degrees. In fact, when you look at the ancient symbolism, you can actually work out roughly the angle at which we're approaching the sun, which is an interesting exercise. But because we were all trailing along behind one another, pole to pole, and rotating, it meant that bright arc in the sky rotated. And this is one of the things that David Talbot came up with, and I think it was a brilliant piece of forensic research. And to do this, you have to give up all preconceptions. This was the key to Velikovsky's work, was you give up all preconceptions about the history of the Earth and how things work, and just accept what the ancients were desperately trying to tell us and try and make sense of it. And when you do that, you realize that this thing circling in the sky was the first time we could tell time. And even the references to what this early day and night did don't make any sense in present-day terms, but it does when you look at it from that proto-Saturnian arrangement. Mm-hmm. Some of the best research that's been done on that period was done by the late Eduardo Cardona, who sadly died only a week or so ago. And he has written some massive volumes with copious documentation referring back to these earliest times and what happened, and the timescale actually goes back to the last ice age, because at that time we had periods of extreme warming and extreme cold. The ancients referred to the extreme cold as the twilight of the gods and the Fimble winter and so on. And the extreme heat was particularly noticed by those in the more equatorial regions, by islanders and that, who said the sky was too close to the Earth and everything burned up. So the Earth itself would have been on a cometary orbit for some time, and that would have alleviated the problem of everything being very cold in the outer regions of the solar system. We were receiving a lot of electrical energy in place of solar energy at that time, which explains why we survived it. But it raises all sorts of philosophical questions about how is it we just happened to land in the Goldilocks zone. We could have ended up out beyond Mars, or we could have ended up in near Mercury, either of which would have been curtains. And this raises all sorts of philosophical issues about life and purpose and all of that kind of stuff. Fascinating.
Space travel. With the theory of the electric universe, would it be more difficult in your eyes to travel to different galaxies or easier?
With the electric universe, you ask the question, why would you bother? There's two aspects to it. One is we are an integral part of the Earth. We are Earthlings. The resonances of our bodies and so on are tuned to the Earth itself. And that raises the question, if we try and colonize even Mars, say, or the Moon, will we any longer be Earthlings? And there's no good answer to that question at present, and it's not something that's being seriously considered, I'm sure. But when I said earlier that using radio waves is not the way that any intelligent race elsewhere in the universe would use to communicate, simply because it's so damn slow. Even the nearest star would take you 4.5 years to send a hello, and another 4.5 years later you might get a response saying g'day.
Right.
Why would you do it? I mean, it's useless. What you would use is the speed of thought, which is instantaneous. So you could carry on a conversation like we are between us and stars anywhere in the galaxy. And it kind of takes you closer, I think, to the meaning of life, and it opens up a whole new way, or a real physics, let's say, to begin to think of ways you might actually tune in to signals which operate longitudinally instead of up and down like radio waves, because it's the longitudinal waves that act like gravity and are not shielded. This is why you cannot shield ESP experiments. You put people in a Faraday cage, remote viewers and that, and the evidence shows that it makes no effect on their abilities. And that's simply because the thought and biological connections within a living creature operate instantaneously without any speed of light delay. That's why you can have coherent, stable particles, coherent, stable planetary systems, and coherent, stable biological systems. It all relies on instant communication between all of the myriad parts. Otherwise, any delays means that you're not any longer in touch with the whole. I mean, the experiments have been done to show that you can detune a high-frequency receiver just by moving it away from your body, at an average kind of speed, which means that if your body relied on speed of light communication, it could actually lose touch with a part of your body that's moving rapidly. And you can imagine how tennis players would get on trying to return one of those high-speed serves. They'd be standing there with the racket dumbfounded as the ball sailed past.
Right.
It can't be done. It can't be done unless your organism is operating in real time as a real-time system.
Yeah, and that's also some of the dangers when you look at these giant cell phone towers next to schools or anywhere for that matter. It's like this Wi-Fi world we live in.
Yeah. Yeah, unfortunately, technology can make use of science just based on what has been shown to work. But when the understanding is faulty, then you are really just experimenting on us. So all of these brilliant new technologies that are developed, both medical and in radio and all of the signaling systems we've got now, you're playing with things that you don't fully understand. Initially, of course, it was thought that radio signals from cell phones and that were safe because the energy, they measured the energy that was dissipated in cellular material as heat, because they thought that it would only be heat that could affect the living cell. But that's not true. If the cell itself is relying on electrical signaling within to maintain its operation and integrity, then any signal, particularly ones that are rapidly changing, like a lot of the data traffic, sort of staccato signaling, is bound to have effects which are not considered by such simplistic thinking.
Sure, absolutely. And maybe I could just ask you another question before we close out tonight, and much appreciated you coming on the show here with us, The Leak Project. I've got to say your website is awesome, thunderbolts.info, also holoscience.com, and then your YouTube channel is fantastic, some excellent podcasts on there. And I like how you just put it together so eloquently as well.
Thanks, Rex.
Absolutely. Now, the question that I was going to ask, you did a podcast recently that talks about how the craters have kind of disappeared on that moon, and I was wondering how that happened.
Oh, that's a good point. One of the people who worked closely with Velikovsky back in the 60s and 70s was an engineer, Ralph Jurgens, and he did some brilliant work, A, on the electrical model of the sun, and B, on planetary cratering, electrical cratering. And of course, when you look at the moon, one of the problems that the scientists faced when they first looked at the craters was they couldn't tell whether they were volcanic or impact. There's arguments in favor of both. The argument against impact is that over 90% of the craters are beautifully circular, or some actually have a corkscrew shape or a hexagonal shape, not the kinds of things you'd expect from an impact from any old angle. However, an electrical discharge always strikes the surface vertically, and therefore the crater that it forms will be either circular, or because the powerful interplanetary exchanges involve very concentrated rotating filaments of charge, the standard way of nature to pass power, electrical power through space, is to have two filaments and twist them around one another. And of course, that's what electrical engineers do when they use twisted pairs of wires, because it reduces the loss of energy from those two pairs of wires. So it's quite fascinating that nature, always does things the easy way. Well, anyway, these two filaments, when they strike the surface, are rotating, so they act like two router bits. And you'll find corkscrew craters, where the intensity of the discharge changed during the discharge, the sculpting of the crater. The other thing is that electricity, the electrical forces, will remove the material from the crater and loft it into space, which means that you have very clean-cut craters, which was something that the Apollo astronauts remarked on. They couldn't believe how sharp the features were. The other thing is that with a lightning bolt, quite often the discharge will be many strokes, one after the other. And what happens there is that the initial crater is formed, and then the second stroke will try and attach itself to the highest point nearby, and usually that's the crater rim. So if you have a look at craters on the moon or any other body in the solar system, you'll often find craters perched right on the perimeter of an earlier crater. Sometimes also you'll find what they call bullseye craters, where there's a crater perched on the central peak, smack right in the middle of the earlier crater. All of these things are easily explained by electricity. They're not explained by impact. So the fact that Ceres has a different cratering pattern than was expected is perfectly okay in the electric universe, because everybody in the solar system has its own story, its own history. And you cannot just make up a story and say this object's been there for 4.5 billion years, or roughly that, wandering around, and then you postulate sometime very early in the history of the solar system, objects, there was a lot of intense bombardment, they call it. This is just making up stories, nothing to do with, you cannot rely on it at all. And since the electrical model explains the intricacies of the cratering patterns on all of the objects in the solar system. In fact, I noticed yesterday there was an article in one of the science journals about Titan. And they said there are canyons, some of these river canyons look like the Grand Canyon. In other words, they've got very steep edges and so on. And when the Cassini mission was announced with the Huygens lander, which was to descend beneath the clouds and it revealed the surface of Titan for the first time, I predicted what would be found. And I said, you will find scarring on the surface of Titan like we see on Mars and on Earth. And here they are now saying these channels look like parts of the Grand Canyon. This is typical of the electric universe, though. I've been able to make predictions well in advance of the discoveries with accuracy that cannot be down to just chance.
That makes me think of those artifacts that were found that look like miniature Death Stars that are over 1 billion years old, at least the carbon testing that they did, and they were actually perfectly balanced. these little cylinder, these little circles that literally they look like the Death Star from Star Wars. I wonder if that was created similar to the way you're talking about, some type of electronic discharge or something. Fascinating, man. This is just incredible. I certainly need to do more research into the electric universe theory.
I think you might be talking about Vesta, the asteroid, which has this colossal bullseye at the South Pole. And
these were found in Africa. These were found in South Africa in mines. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, right. Yeah, well, there's falls of very pure glass and so on to be found scattered around in Arabia. And a lot of anomalies. In fact, there are groups on the Thunderbolts website who discuss just that. They're interested in the electrical scarring activities on Earth. And when you start looking, they're just everywhere. In fact, after our conference this year in Phoenix, there was a group of the attendees who went on a tour around the southwest there, looking at the electrical scarring through all that area. It's quite spectacular, actually. And the Grand Canyon is probably the best known example. If you look at shots of that from space, it looks just like an electric arc that's burnt its way across the surface. The stories about how it formed and that tiny river coursing down through the the base of that mile-deep canyon, it just doesn't hold water, so to speak.
Absolutely. Well, it's just a real honor to speak with you. I really appreciate you coming on the show. Folks, check out holoscience.com. Also go to thunderbolts.info. Make sure to check out the YouTube channel, Thunderbolts. Subscribe, become a member there, as well as check out our channel, youtube.com/clandestine Time Lord. We've got a new channel as well, the William Wallace channel. They're updated daily with new content. And our website, leakproject.com. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us before we close out tonight, Wal?
I'd just like to mention that our annual conference is unlike any others you can visit on Earth, and our next one will be in August in Phoenix next year. The information will be available in advance. In fact, I think a lot of the information for that is already available on the Thunderbolts website now. But by all means, the excitement, the adventure, and so on really gets to people at those conferences.
Absolutely. I can certainly imagine. Well, this has been great. You have a wonderful evening, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Okay. Thanks, Rex.
Oh, thank you so much. Take care. Hey everybody, this is Rex Bear with Leak Project. I hope you're having a nice day wherever you are. It is August 14th, 2016. Radiation levels are low at 0.11 microsieverts per hour. Now, we had an incredible interview that I am presenting to you today with Wal Thornhill from the Thunderbolts project. He's got some amazing work on the electric universe, and his hypothesis is absolutely mind-blowing. I would strongly recommend listening to this interview if you have an interest in the electric universe. I have never talked to anybody with so much knowledge on the subject. Now, much of the solar system we live in today, he claims, was actually formed from a binary star, aka brown dwarf. Now, is that brown dwarf star Saturn? We talk about electric winds on electric worlds in an electric universe. We discuss the red and blue Kachina, the Hopi prophecies, and what the red Kachina as well as blue Kachina could actually be. We also get into the translations of Nibiru, and could it actually be a reflection of what happened in the past? We talk about how old the solar system is. We get into space travel and how possible that is in an electric universe. We discuss shooting stars, black holes, interplanetary discharges. We talk about the missing craters on the moon Ceres. We discuss the different stars in the electric universe and what they actually are. This is quite mind-bending as well. Then we discuss gravity. How does time travel fit into the theory? Quantum physics versus the electronic universe or the electric universe. Life after physical death. Science, global warming. How is the Grand Canyon created? Newton's electric clockwork solar system. How the present view of the sky is not the key to the past. We discuss cosmic symbols of ancient sky anomalies, the Greek pantheon and mythos, as well as the Sumerian translations. We talk about gravity being faster than the speed of light by 20 billion times, as well as what is time. This is discussed on this podcast as well as more. Make sure to subscribe to leakproject.com as well as youtube.com/clandestine time lord. You'll get access to a bounty of gourmet clandestine knowledge. Absolute incredible stuff, you guys. I've talked to people from all over the world, and we're bringing that for you guys to decide if it's valid in your life or not. Also, make sure to check out the Thunderbolts project on YouTube, thunderbolts.info, as well as holoscience.com. Be the change you want to see. Have a fantastic day. Talk to you soon. Wall, it's an honor to have you on the show here with us at the Leak Project. You've got a beautiful website, actually 2 websites that are really nice. I love your YouTube channel. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd recommend going to thunderbolts.info. Got a plethora of intel. How the heck are you?
I'm fine. Thanks, Rex. Thanks for the call.
Absolutely. It's just an honor to speak with you. I am not well versed in the electric universe. I've heard a little bit of that theory before, and it certainly makes a lot of sense. With the little that I do know about it, I can definitely relate. If you would, for our audience, tell them a little bit about yourself, and then we'll segue into your work.
Okay. It's not unusual that people don't know much about the electric universe because, of course, all of our cosmology at present completely ignores electricity. You won't find it in any index or in any glossy book on the Big Bang, which is quite odd when you think about it, because all of the matter that we are made up of, and the Earth's made up, and stars are made up from, are all made up of charged particles. And the basic idea of the electric universe is that if you try and apply a simple repeated pattern, both downwards into the subatomic particles and also up to galaxies, you can see repeated patterns, and ones which are easy to identify once you allow electricity to enter into the discussion. The way I came to this was perhaps a little odd, but a great number of people I've found know about Velikovsky and his book Worlds in Collision, which was a bestseller in 1950 for months on end. That is until the Harvard mafia managed to have the publisher, Macmillan, a technical book publisher, burn the books and hand it over to a popular publisher, Doubleday. So book burning still occurs, and it gives you an idea that cosmology and this trying to understand how we fit in the universe is more of a religious pursuit than a scientific one in most instances. Now, what Velikovsky did was to take a forensic approach to all of the most ancient information that he could get hold of from around the world, and came to certain conclusions about the recent history of the solar system. Now, of course, we're told this bedtime story about how the solar system was created about 4.5 billion years ago. And of course, when you push things that far back in time, you can make up any story you like.
Exactly.
And the interesting thing is, of course, that the theory just doesn't work. You know, I attend meetings by professional astronomers here in Canberra, and an expert on planet formation theory and the formation of the solar system admitted that you needed a different theory for every planet. The solar system is a complete fruit salad of objects. There is no real gradation from the sun outwards, which is what you'd expect if the planets are just formed from the leftovers. And when I mentioned the solar system, of course, now we've got over 3,500 exoplanetary systems that have been discovered over recent years, and we appear to be an odd one out, because the exoplanetary systems throw up even more mysteries and throw into doubt this bedtime story, once upon a time 4.5 billion years ago. So the thing that Velikovsky did was he threw down a gauntlet to astronomers, and they didn't bother to pick it up. They just got up in the pulpit and said, no, it disobeys Newton's laws. But you've got to remember that all of these so-called laws are man-made, and they're generally restricted to a view which is what they call geocentric. In other words, our conditions on Earth are extrapolated out into the galaxies as if we can do that without any consequences. And of course you can't, because when you look at galaxies, they don't behave according to Newton's law. So just extrapolating Newton's law out into deep space doesn't work, which should have provided some sense of humility in the astronomers. But rather than that, no, they just discarded what Velikovsky had discovered, and that was that Venus was recognized globally by all ancient cultures as having been the archetypal comet, the doomsday comet, which means that Venus is a new addition to the solar system, if you like. So the solar system does have a recent history, and the old bedtime story is just that. It's a fairy story. The electric universe grew out of trying to explain how you could have an object within human memory on a cometary orbit now having the most circular orbit in the solar system. And Velikovsky felt that electricity and magnetism played a principal role in providing this clockwork regularity that we see today. And it's taken me a lifetime to come to a satisfactory conclusion with the help, pardon me, with the help of a lot of people who have been marginalized over the years for coming up with so-called outrageous ideas. Sometimes the truth is more outrageous than anything anyone can dream up as a fiction story. And the electric universe certainly fits that category. However, the test of any good theory is, does it successfully predict and also explain new discoveries without inventing new forces, new particles, new fudge factors at every turn? The electric universe has been able to accommodate all of the findings in recent years, both from space and in particle physics. It can accommodate them quite easily simply by painting a picture of our real place in the universe. And that's what the electric universe is all about.
Well, I'm thinking about how if everything breaks down to a vibrational frequency, I guess that's a form of electricity in a sense?
Well, the connection between all matter is electrical. Fundamentally, it's all electrical. You know, an atom holds together because the electrons are drawn towards the protons in the nucleus. And in galaxies, it's quite easy to show, and in fact it's been done with peer-reviewed research in Electrical Engineering Journal, that galaxies are effectively very simple electric motors. They're Faraday motors. And then that raises the question, where does the energy come to turn these motors? Where is the electrical energy coming from? And the simple answer is we don't know, except that you can trace the power lines with radio telescopes. The problem is, of course, that because cosmology is more of a religious pursuit and it's driven by beliefs, no one has yet been able to let go of the idea that the magnetic fields that we see everywhere in space somehow are just magically there, when we all know, electrical engineers know in particular, that magnetism requires an electric current or electric motion of particles to generate them.
Well, you said that earlier that the universe, you brought up the 4 billion year old mark, because a lot of scientists say 4 billion, I've heard 6, 7, etc. How old is the universe?
Well, we're talking there, or I was talking about the age of the solar system, which is estimated at 4.5 billion years. However, all of these estimates are based on stories that were made up at the beginning of the 20th century. And the basic problem they faced then was, how do you keep the sun burning long enough to produce all of the erosion and all of the sculpting we see on the Earth? You know, if you the 4.5 billion years refers to the age of the solar system. In other words, that's supposed to be the age of the Earth. But all of these estimates of ages are based on the bedtime story. And the bedtime story was developed at the beginning of the 20th century to answer how the sun could burn for 4.5 billion years, because at that stage the geologists had said it would take hundreds of millions, maybe even 1,000 million years or 1 billion years for some of these features we see on Earth to have had time to form, if you assume that the forces we see in action today are the only forces that have ever acted on the Earth, which is a pretty rash assumption. So when nuclear energy came along, of course, they suddenly said, we found an energy source that could last for that length of time. But of course, then Eddington, who gave us the standard model of the interior of the sun, had the sheer arrogance to say it should not be too difficult to understand something as simple as a star, which was based on the idea that you have just a ball of hydrogen and helium self-gravitating, and somehow or another it forms enough pressure and heat in the center to start nuclear reactions. Now, all of this was just sheer conjecture. We're unable to repeat the hypothesized nuclear reactions in any laboratory on Earth to test that idea. And of course, one of the greatest bits of evidence against this idea that somehow the sun is up there just trying to shed itself of internal energy is when you look at sunspots. That's a region of the bright photosphere that's been pushed aside, and you can see much deeper, and it's dark down there. It's cooler, which suggests that whatever is inside is not trying to release energy out into space, and that whatever a star is something reacting to its environment. And this is one of the aspects of the electric universe that's very important, because we propose that stars are an electrical discharge phenomenon, primarily. Of course, nuclear reactions are taking place, but they are mediated by electrical power coming in from deep space. And this also can be tested by radio telescopes, and there's one radio astronomer in particular, Gerrit Verschuur, who has shown pretty definitively that the magnetic fields you can trace in space are